All right, so my modeling people, it's a full class of other people. We're going to go over ZBrush stuff today. The computers in the school have ZBrush 4R8 installed. ZBrush 2018 is available, so if you do download it, I think there's like a 15-day trial where you could download it and use it at home. And there's no like watermarks or anything on the trial version of it, from what I understand. The interface for ZBrush is completely different than other softwares. The way you use it, everything is completely different. So it's not like the same techniques you would use in Maya would apply here. They're completely, totally different. Typically when you open ZBrush, this is what it looks like. And this is called the light box. And it's showing you here's all the files and things that you could open along with tools and brushes and whatever else. So we would just click light box off and that goes away. When you draw stuff inside ZBrush like this, this is basically like painting in 3D. This doesn't have a volume, it's just literally like as I paint something, it's like stacking it on top of the previous thing that I drew. If I hold Alt and drag, it like pushes it down. It's hard to see, but that's what it's doing, and eventually it'll go away. Okay, so that's what this simple brush is doing. So I'm going to click on a different shape here. Now you'll notice when I click on a different shape and then I start drawing, it's just like, there it is. And as I click and drag, it's just drawing new 3D shapes inside the scene. And this is usually one of the things that confuses people the most because it's kind of like you were in Photoshop drawing stuff, but it's using 3D objects. If I click and hold here, there's other shapes like cone. And depending on where I'm clicking and dragging, it'll drag out a different shape of the cone and I can change the direction of it and all that. This is still the painting part. So right now it looks like it's 3D, but nothing is actually 3D. It's not until I hit edit that the last thing I drew then becomes actual 3D. So everything else is flattened out as an image, but the last thing I drew, I can click and drag around and see that thing as a 3D item. Okay, so this is typically what will confuse you. I'm going to go to Document, I'm going to say Clear, or New, there we go. And then I'm going to click on just a sphere just so we can see this. I'm going to drag a sphere. I'm going to hit T, which is the Edit hotkey here. And now if I don't click on this, I just drag outside of it, now I'm spinning around it. If I drag on top of this, it'll give me a little warning saying this is not editable mesh, so I'll say go ahead and make it editable. And then I can click and drag, and now it's like sculpting. So now we're in this world of this is more like clay, where we could just start sculpting stuff on here. All the brushes work really well across the board as far as what their controls are. Clicking and dragging will do whatever the brush is intended to do initially. And then holding Alt will do the opposite. So if one of the brushes is pushing, the opposite is pulling. If one of the brushes is to deflate, it'll inflate. If one of the brushes is to crease, it'll separate. Okay? So I hold Alt, you'll see the little minus key, and now it's like pushing it inward. All the brushes are right here. These are all the default ones that come with ZBrush. There's a factory thing, not factory, ZBrush Central. We're very much like Substance. You could actually go to and you could download different brushes. You could find more tutorials. They have ZBrush challenges, that kind of thing. I'm just going to do ZBrush brushes. And here's a bunch of different kinds of brushes that you can download. The idea with these is very similar to Substance, where whatever we're trying to emulate, we would download a brush for that. So if we're trying to emulate skin, we would go and find a skin brush. Here's like veins. Here's like reptile things. These are just black and white images. Go ahead. Yep, these ones are free. Around Christmas time, yeah, they don't have other ones there. Around Christmas time, some of the people that are online will post their own stuff that they've created. So there's this one guy, he's on Gumroad, his name is Michael Dunham. And for 20 bucks, I get access to every single one of his ZBrush brushes that he made. So for all of these things like teeth and these and whatever else, I have full access to all of the brushes he makes pretty much forever, which is awesome because if you look, this set is $5, this set is $2, this set is $5. This one's free, so you can download stuff like that. Okay, like a whole bunch of stuff. So if you find a deal where it's like 20 bucks, it was like 20 bucks for this lifetime membership, down from 130, which is awesome. So I get those pretty much forever. Okay, and you'll see the power of that. Right now I'm just using a standard brush, which is just kind of like pulling it out. If we look at the shape of this, it's basically like the basic Photoshop brush. It's very strong in the center, and then it gradually softens out at the edges. If I switch to a different brush, let's say Blob, and I click and drag, you're not going to notice a huge difference on this. It's doing something different, of course, but it's hard to notice. Zbrush works in, in resolutions for your geometry. So right now I have a certain amount of divisions on this. Because of how my screen is set up, you can't really see the divisions, but if I turn that off, maybe I can stretch this out and then scoot this over. Yep, there we go. So now you can see how many active points I have. The more points you have, the more geometry you can deform. This is, again, another area where people will get confused because of just, it's different. I'm going to shrink that. If you hold down Control and you hit D, that will subdivide it. So now I have 4 times as many divisions. So instead of 8,000, I have 32,000. Now as I use that blob brush, it's a little bit more distinct about what it's doing. If I hit Control D again, now I have about 120,000 divisions. So I'm going to keep going here. This is 120,000. You can definitely see there's a big difference from what I had over on this side. If I switch back to my standard brush, even here you can see there's a bigger difference. This is a lot smoother than it was a minute ago. Now what's cool is I can also go back down resolutions. So if I hold down Shift and hit D, it takes me to the previous resolution. Okay, it doesn't remove any of the detail. It just allows me to move between the different levels. So if I hit Shift D again, eventually I'll get back to where I originally was on this shape. So just so you can see that, here's my divisions currently 8,000. My total points are about 130,000. If I try to hit Control D again, it's not going to work. I already have those divisions. It's already divided to 130,000, but it won't let me get to that yet. If I hit regular D, it'll move me up the levels. Okay, so Control D adds new levels. Shift D moves me back in the levels. Regular D moves me forward in levels. Okay, and you can kind of see that here for sure. If you go over here on the side to your geometry, as I hit Shift D, you can see how my division level went down. Shift D again, it went down. Regular D, regular D. So you could also click and drag here to adjust which level you're on. I can hit Control D again and again and again, and this is where ZBrush is awesome because I'm at 8 million divisions, and you'll see that this is going to move just as quickly as it was a second ago. Inside Maya, if I had anything divided 8 million times, it would pretty much crash. In most programs, it would crash or just not play nicely. And then now, as I go back to this blob brush, and I start playing with it, you'll see again it's doing much more high resolution detail to it. So some of the controls, clicking and dragging outside of your shape or even in this blank area here, this little margin, will let you tumble around your object. If you hold Alt and you right click, it lets you do the panning around it. And if you do Alt, left and right at the same time, come on. Sorry, Control, yeah, there we go. Control, Alt, and right click and drag. It lets you zoom in. Okay, so you have to get used to those controls. I'm still getting used to it based on going between 20 different programs. Okay, and now that I'm closer, you can see again what that blob brush is doing. You'll basically find a set of brushes that you'll be bouncing around to. So it's a rare thing that I would actually use this blob brush. Typically, I stick between the Claybuildup brush, the smooth brush, There's a Damien standard brush, or as it puts it in here, the Dam standard brush. There it is, the Dam standard brush. Let me go to an area that's cleaned. There we go. If I click and drag, you'll see how it creates these like little lines inside there. Okay, so these are good for adding like little creases or line work to our stuff. And then this clay buildup one, if you ever seen any of the stuff like on Halloween, they usually have it all over the place where they make costumes and stuff. And they'll have like, not costumes, but clay sculptures. They start off with a wad of clay, and then they just start adding more clay to it to create their shapes. And that's what this clay buildup is for. So as I add clay buildup here, you can see how it adds more clay just to that area. And so if I'm trying to build up an area where I'm trying to add more detail, this is the brush I'll use. You'll see when I get into the actual geometry, my character, of how that's going to work, okay? And then there's other ones like inflate. This will inflate the area. Flatten, so this will flatten it, okay? I'm not going to go through all the brushes. I really leave that to you to kind of explore those as you're going. Basically, if you get to a spot where you're like, I want to flatten something or I want to pinch something, just go in there and look around and you'll find something that will say pinch. There it is right here. And this will let me pinch these together if I'm trying to create like a little tight line that happens there. Or planar. There it goes. Okay, so there's a lot of different brushes, and again, you could add more to this. Crumple is one that I'll kind of use sometimes if I'm trying to dirty something up. If I modeled the character, I have a shirt, and I want the shirt to have like wrinkles on it, this is a nice brush to be able to do that for, okay? Sizes for the brush. If I hit S, this brings open my size of whatever brush I'm painting with, okay? So I can just click and drag and it'll change the size of it. If you right click, this will also bring up the draw size. It also adjusts focal shift. So focal shift is your drop off. If you look at the brush, there's a light circle and then a darker circle on the outside. That's your drop off. If I change this focal shift, you'll see how that changes where those lines are at. And it's basically going to make the brush have less drop off here, or go the other way, it has more drop off here. And depending on what you're trying to do, you may want to adjust that. There's also a Z intensity, and that's how intense the brush is. Ignore the RGB for now, but there's a Z intensity that will control how strong this specific brush is. So you can see this is a lot of crumpling happening now, where before, oops, it's 0. Before, this is very subtle, okay? So typically you'll play with those settings as well to get the desired effect. I'll also use Shift, and you'll see as I hold Shift, it toggles between the crumple and the smooth. Whatever brush I'm on, Shift is my toggle to get back to smooth. Okay, so sometimes I'll make my brush bigger, hold Shift, and smooth it out. Now this is why you may want to go between the different levels. When I have 8 million divisions and I'm smoothing this out, there's no way that this is going to get smooth fast enough for me. So if I do Shift D to get down to a lower resolution level, then hold Shift, look how fast that smooths out. Much better than it was a second ago. Then I can hit D, hold Shift and smooth that out, hit D, hold Shift, smooth that out, maybe not so much. There we go. Hit D again. That looks good. Hit D again. That looks good. Okay? So that's why you may want to work between these different levels, because you want bigger details and then smaller details, so you're kind of bouncing around. The other brush I'll use a lot is the Move brush, which is right here. And this allows me to just grab a piece and just move it. Okay, so if I'm reshaping a character and I want their face to be different proportions or move things around, this is typically the brush I'll use to do that. A lot of times when you watch a speed modeling, they'll start off with a sphere and then just start pulling and pushing. Even though I've modeled on this, if I were to click the sphere, you'll see that it replaces what I just did with this new sphere. If I click back here, there's my other one. That's what's really confusing about the software, is that there isn't like in Maya, there's like, here's all your objects. This is where my objects are stored, is inside this area, okay? And there's a subtool where they're also inside that. So on line, you'll typically see where people have a sphere, and then they're just kind of, yes, make this polymesh, where they're just kind of grabbing and pushing and pulling points to create their character. Now, in a character situation, it definitely helps to have symmetry on, because you can see just by me pushing and pulling that this doesn't look symmetrical at all. Lots of tools are under all of these. You can kind of go through and look at them. I'm going to hit on the highlights. ZBrush is a huge program. Under transform, here's where symmetry is. You'll see the hotkey next to it is X. So I will hit X. I'm going to click on a new sphere. I'm going to make it a polymesh. If I hit X and spin around, it's somewhere, there it is. There's my symmetry. Okay, so it's not this direction, it's like rotated. I'll rotate it the other way, and there it is. So now as I push and pull this, you can see very easily how I can create a head and keep it symmetrical as I'm trying to build this. I recommend, before you start building your character, just getting into ZBrush and playing around. Don't worry about creating something specific. Just get in there and start tweaking stuff. Okay, and just so you can see, this is me kind of pushing in the eyes, pulling out the nose area. You see how low resolution this is? And that's how you want to work. Just like when you're modeling something regular, you work at a pretty low resolution, and then you start upping the resolution on this. So I'm going to hit Control D. I'm going to soften this a little bit more, pull out the nose a little bit more, pull this out some, maybe smooth this. For all my brushes, you can keep going up here. You can right click and find your brush. Right here and find it through there. Get used to the hotkeys, because you'll find them to be tremendously helpful. B will bring up all of your brushes. And then if I wanted, let's say, pinch, I'll hit P, because that's what it starts with. And then there's a hotkey button right next to this. So it's I. So then I can hit I. As you get more comfortable with the software, oops. Did it again. Come on. I changed my color of this, and now that doesn't want to show nicely. ZBrush on a small screen is obviously not very user-friendly. Shrink this down, let me pull this up. Let me pull this down. All right, it doesn't want to change it. There it goes, it went back. I just lost my color, and it's hard to work when it's like a lighter color. There we go. What was I just saying? Oh, right. So when you're working on your brushes, you'll hit B, you'll click on, let's say, C, because I want the clay buildup, then you'll hit B again, because that's the hotkey for it. But then as you get comfortable with this, you'll just be able to hit those hotkeys very quickly and switch between your brushes, instead of going here and trying to pick it from this huge list. So you'll see this thing kind of pop up every once in a while as I go and pick different brushes. Okay, and again, you'll just get kind of used to them. Keep a little piece of paper next to you and start writing it down, because you'll see how handy that is. Okay, so I'm just going through and just kind of tweaking stuff. This isn't how we're going to do the character, but I just want you to kind of see just some of the workflow of how I can change very quickly my proportions around just by using, let's say, the move tool, or if I'm trying to, that's way too small. If I'm trying to add some more detail to, let's say, the eye area, maybe I'll use my clay buildup and add some shape in here, kind of soften that out. Same thing with the nose. Let's pull this out a little bit more. I'll add another level of division, start smoothing this. I'll use my Claybuildup to push in some nostrils. Smooth that out. Use my move tool to pull these down. Push that up some. I'll add some cheeks to this. Yep, that's way too strong. Let's hit. My hotkeys aren't working. So I hit. There you go. All right, I'm going to go down a couple levels and kind of smooth it out some. I think it's a little bit too puffy. There we go. And then hit D to get back up to my levels. I'm going to draw on the line for the mouth. And then I'm going to use my Claybuildup just to add in that lip shape. And again, you're working at different levels. So even though this doesn't look good now, as we get up higher levels, we've blocked in where the stuff is going to go. It should be pretty easy to get it in there, okay? So first thing to do, just get in there and start playing around. Get used to using the brushes. Get used to adjusting your intensity. Get used to adjusting the size of it, using Symmetry. And then once you're a little bit more comfortable with it, then you can start getting into the actual character, okay? So this is how we're going to start the actual character. We're going to use these things called Z-spheres. The way that they work is we create Z-spheres at all basically where the joints of the body would be, where the main shapes of the character would be. We make sure I've clicked on that. I'll actually close ZBrush down. And I'm going to start it back up again. ZBrush. 2018 and R8, they work very similar in how we're working, so it's not crazy different. Going back and forth, I'm not sure if that would work. So if you do download it at home, download R8. I'll recommend, yes, you can update. I'm going to turn my light box off. I'm going to choose Z-sphere. I'm going to click and drag my first one, and I'm going to hold Shift to snap it so that it goes straight inside my scene. And then I'm going to hit T so that I can edit it. I'm also going to hold Shift as I rotate around to get this to be lined up straight. Okay, so just like that. I'll hit X to turn on my Symmetry. I can see my Symmetry is going up and down. That means my world is kind of rotated, so I'm going to rotate this some. There we go, that's better. And now what I'm going to do is just click and drag. So this is basically, I'm going to start off with like the pelvis area. I'm going to click and drag, and these will be like the hips. If I want to move these, I can, I don't click and drag again because that will drag new Z-sphere, so I'm going to hit undo. I'm going to switch to the move tool. You'll see move, rotate, and scale, W, E, and R. They're the same ones as Cinema, if you remember those. Then I can just drag these over where I want these to be. So think of this as kind of like your blocking in phase of your character of how you want that character's initial pose to be. If you've ever seen a wire armature, you know, this is basically what we're doing, is creating this kind of like wire armature that the clay will then be kind of formed around these pieces, okay? So this is the pelvis, which is going to be like this area here. Then I'm going to go out to where I want those hips to be. I'll rotate around. I want them, you know, let's say like that. I'm going to hit the draw tool again. Again, you can see the hotkeys there, so Q and T. I'm going to click and drag, switch to my move tool, pull it down, zoom out a bit. These are where the knees are going to be. Switch back to my draw tool, draw another Z-sphere, switch back to my move tool, pull these down. I'm going to grab this one and pull it forward. There's the knee, and there's the ankle. Okay. Switch back to my draw tool. I'm going to draw out the foot. Switch to my move tool, pull the foot out. Okay, so just based on this, we have a pretty long-legged, skinny-legged character. If I hit A, I can see what that character is going to look like when I actually create it. Okay, we're still in preview mode. Hit A again, we're back to this. I'm going to switch back to my draw, and I'm going to draw the upper body. So I'm going to click here and drag, switch to my move tool, pull it up. I basically am skipping the spine. I'll add the spine in later. It's just kind of like that's the trunk of the character. I'll switch back to this. I'm going to draw in the shoulders. This is the elbow. Well, let me do this. Let me move this out. So this is, let's say, the wrists. Okay. If I want the elbows in here, I can just click in the middle, and it'll automatically add a new joint right in the middle. And then I can go to my move tool and then move it back. You want to give yourself some space between all of these pieces. If you try to create them on top of each other, ZBrush will actually blend them together, and it's difficult to separate them. So keeping them separate. I'm going to move this down some, switch back to my Z sphere brush. Here's my neck, and then here's the head. Okay, so let's go with a comically large head for this character. I'm going to switch to the scale tool and make this enormous. Pull it forward a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to hit A, and then I can take a look at this and see what the character is going to look like. So very easily I can see hey, that's pretty close to what I wanted, right? It's not exact. I don't have bones and shapes or detail. It's just kind of getting a rough idea. All the way down to the bottom of this, you'll see where it says adaptive skin. So you may want to take the resolution up and the density up. It's thinking. And this will smooth it out even further if that's what you're doing. When we hit A, it's doing this preview right here and letting us see exactly what the character is going to look like when we actually lock it in. The fact that the feet are kind of curved like this, that's not a huge deal. Same thing with the arms. Eventually we'll lock it all in so it's nice and tight. Okay. If I hit A, I can switch back to this and then make some changes. Let's go grab this and pull that there. Let's pull this up. Okay. Again, just kind of playing with this, and this is one of the benefits of ZBrush is that it's so fluid to just go between all these different things to change what your character is looking like. Really short arms with really long legs. Pull these elbows in a little bit more, pull the shoulders down some and back some. Yep. There we go. Or Steve Urkel, if you know who Steve Urkel is, right? So I'll hit A. Now imagine if we did this in Maya, we started off, we would basically create all of these polygons, and then we're like, oh, well, I want to change where his arms are, how long they are. It would take a lot more work to do. Here, it's there we go. If we want to change it, we can go back and change it again. If I want any of these to be bigger, I can just click on one of these joints, go to my scale, and just scale it up. And obviously it works the other way too. If you scale it down, it'll scale it down. So let's take the knee here and make the knee a bit bigger. Make this a bit bigger. A little bit bigger, and my toes, oops. I think I probably want to have just maybe another one right in here. And maybe another one right there just to okay. So now we'll hit A. Now these hands are pretty close to the hips. We'll see it may actually connect them. Yes, it did. If we look very close, you can see how it connected the hands to the hips there. So that's why you want to keep them far apart. So I'm going to go to my move tool. If you click right on the joint itself and move it, it moves just the joint. If you click and drag in the middle, it'll move the whole arm out. And the fact that he has like this really like high crotch line here, that's not a big deal. We'll fix that. All right, so I'm going to say that that is good for this character. Okay, a good starting point at least. I'm going to take my resolution down here. So let's set that to 200. Set this to 2. Okay, so that should be good. Let me see how many divisions I have on here. 728,000, that's still way too many. Let's knock this down to, let's say, 1. 744, let's take this Dynamesh down. I guess that's as low as we're going to get this. All right, so let's hit Make. And what this does is it actually creates a new shape here. That's my blocked in version. If I go to my wireframe, this is what my wireframe currently looks like. And that's like a lot of mesh on there. Oops, let's turn off the wireframe. If we need to go back to the original shape, we can click back on the Z sphere here, hit A, and get back to it. This one doesn't have those Z spheres anymore. It's like baked in. This one has those, so we can always go back to that original shape and tweak what it looks like. So I'm going to go to this one. I'm actually going to go to Geometry. I'm going to say Reconstruct Subdivisions. Operation canceled. Let's try Dynamesh. That one didn't want to work. So we'll take this down to, let's say, 152. Turn this off. Turn this back on. And what I'm doing is just trying to get like a lower resolution as my starting point. Let's turn these both on here. That should give us a much smoother, there you go. So polish and project, 56, much better, okay? I'm going to go back to my Z-sphere guy. I'm going to go to my adaptive skin. And set this to 2. I want to have it more rounded. It's still too blocky for me. That's fine. Like, that's good there. So I'm going to make that. Go to number 2, which is more rounded. Go to my Dynamesh. I'm not going to do the polish this time. I'm just going to leave it as project. And still too many points. It's like 1.17. I need to lower this down further. 0.107, 0.124. There we go. That's much better. Okay, so less divisions. I'm going to make sure my symmetry is on. I'm going to hold Shift. And I'm going to start smoothing this out. When you have the wireframe on, it does this weird glitchy-like thing, so I turn that off. Okay, I think I'm going to still go down a little bit further, like 32. There we go. Much better. All right, even better. Okay, so I went down pretty far, and you can see where my divisions are. It's ugly geometry, but it doesn't matter. We just need something nice. And again, that's one thing we don't worry about inside of ZBrush really, is clean geometry because of just how it works. Oops, my hands got connected. Let's go back, back, back. So undo bars right here. Let's do the polish. Let's do Dynamesh. Nope, you're still connecting. All right, I need to go back. Typically, you don't have to go back and forth this many times, but today, of course, we do. Pull these a little bit further away, pull that a little bit further away. And make. There we go. And there's a wireframe. much better. We're not connected there. It's connected here, but that's fine. This will smooth out. Okay, and so my first step is just to go through and smooth out this entire thing. So I'm going to make my brush really big, and we can really affect the entire thing here. Okay, I'm going to use a tablet also. If you want to borrow one for the class, you can borrow one for the class and just return it before you leave. It's pressure sensitive, so as we start painting on here, obviously it's going to be adjust as harder we press, the more deformation we're going to have. So I'm going to start going into this with my clay buildup and start just tweaking things. Let me turn these off again. I don't like these lines that it's giving me in the middle. That's much better, much more evenly spread out. So now it's better. So my first step is just to kind of go through and start shaping out what I want this to look like. So I've smoothed it a bit. Let me go to my move tool. Let me give it more of a skull. And you have to think of this like the bones are there, like what would it look like without an actual face, and then build the face on top of that. If I need more divisions, I'm going to turn Dynamesh off. I can just hit Control D and get those more divisions in here. In this case, Dynamesh is just our starting point. Some people will model right in Dynamesh. Smooth that out, smooth this out. There we go. Okay, so now that he's smoothed out, I have some basic forms here. Oops. I'm going to use my clay buildup and start roughing in some of these areas that I want some more detail. So let's say right here, I want to give him more of a chest. As I model this, I'm kind of following the contours of where the muscles would go in. So your chest muscles flow over and around your shoulder. Like this. So they would come up here and they would wrap around this, and then these would go this way. Okay, so that's kind of how I'm modeling this, is flowing here. And then I can smooth these out. And this is going to be the process for a lot of this, is that you're going to start adding in these clay buildups, wrapping stuff around, and then smoothing it out to blend it in. Here's the stomach. Let's go with like skinny, like weird skinny. So I'm holding Alt as I drag, and that's creating a cavity in the stomach area. I'm going to make my brush smaller and kind of get some of the ribs here too. Now obviously this is cartoony, he has some weird proportions. So we have to kind of make some artistic decisions as to how we're going to lay this out. I'm going to raise his crotch up a bit. I think the hips need to come in some more too. There we go. Needs a butt. And don't get fixated on, you need to get one area perfect. One area will never be perfect until the very end, until you're fully done. It's just a matter of kind of bouncing around and just adjusting stuff as you see it. There is a thickness to each brush, so even though I'm on the back of the leg here and I'm pulling it, it's also pulling the front of this, so I may need to shrink the brush down so it doesn't pull all the way through. And I may need to make several pulls here to get that to line up. So there's the knee coming out. I'm going to use my clay buildup brush. Just kind of give a little bit more thickness on the inside of the leg here. See how I go back here where the calves are? And I haven't finished the top, I'm just moving around. I just want to start seeing where the shapes are going to start forming. The feet probably need to have a little bit more thickness to them. Kind of like lost it. I may use my inflate here, just so the feet are kind of like elf shoes. If I just inflate this, it gives me a bit more room to work with. And then I can use my move brush to kind of reshape what I want them to look like. And then smooth it out. And my character is definitely like lopsided here. If this person was standing, I think they would probably fall backwards. I'm going to move him back, so I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to grab his legs. And what this does, it creates a mask in that area. And then I'm just going to switch to my actual move tool and just pull this here. I'm going to hit Control and click out there, and it switches it. Then I can rotate, and then move this down. I'm going to Control, drag his foot. Control click here. Control Alt, drag this to deselect it. Oops. And then rotate that. And move that back. Kind of. I think I'll leave it like that and just adjust it from there. All right. So I'm going to go back to my draw tool and just smooth this out. Maybe switch to a bigger move brush so I can just kind of push and smooth. Oops. To clear your mask, you just Control drag out here and it'll clear your mask for you. So I'm adjusting his proportions, trying to get him to look like it's standing a little bit more natural and not like his feet are really far forward. Pull the calves up some. And I didn't do the hands purposefully. I typically like to do those separate and then add them in just because they're so fine detail. I don't like to get like bogged down with looking at the hands while I have this stuff. I'm using my one brush to kind of push in where the spine is, another one to pull out some of this detail here, where the neck comes into the head. I need to give him more of a jaw, a bigger brush. And then a little clay buildup in this area to kind of push that in, pull out the forms. And what I'm doing here is looking at where the actual, like, if you've seen Matrix, there's a scene in it where Neo has this like mask over his mouth where he can't talk. I try to basically build that for the mouth. And then for the eyes, I just kind of put in these holes for now, and then eventually I'll shape out what that is going to look like. Pushing in some of those areas here. pulling out the jawline, and then smoothing it, pulling out eyebrows or a cranial area. And then at some point you got to figure out what your character's expression on their face is going to be. Obviously, if they're angry, their eyes are going to look one way, and if they're, you know, softer, bigger eyes, maybe they'll look a different way. Pull these out. Right? So there's where I would start my character. I'm not going to go into too much more detail at this point, just because you have to get here before you can get any further. It'll make more sense once you actually get to this point, as to what you want your stuff to look like. You can also build pieces separate. So if you build a new shape, then you can add it into there later, which is what I'll do with the hands. Another thing that people will typically do, if I hit the, let's say, W key and I go to move this, but I don't move him, I just click and drag, or not move. Oops. There we go. If I hit T, that's what it is, and then I click and drag, you'll see how I drag another one of these guys, and another one of these guys, and another one of those guys. This might look like I've ruined everything, but I haven't. I just go back to T again. I can hit F to frame it, tumble around, and then if I just go to draw and say clear, under color, and say clear, it clears the rest of them out of there, and I basically have my guy back to where he was. Okay, so that's just something that will happen probably most likely. Okay, so when you start working on it, go through, play with it a little bit, then you'll jump into the Z-spheres and then start creating what you want your character's pose to look like. This is another one that I did. I don't know if I can open it in ZBrush. I'm going to open it in ZBrush 18 because that's what I did it in. I guess I can just try it here. When you do save, use Control-S to save your stuff. If you go to Document and Save, it'll save basically just like a flattened out image. You can't tweak it or modify it afterwards. Okay, so do Control-S. There's like several spots that you can save. This is save, this document, save, and then there's another one somewhere that you can also save. So if you just use Control-S, you'll be safe. It's already saved you, so I don't need to open it. And Documents, ZBrush Monster. Yep, there he is. So here's the start of the other monster that I'll be doing. So you can see the same thing. I started off with this Z-sphere character. I got his basic pose, and then worked through the basic shape like this, or like that, and then got to here. So you can see how I'm kind of shaping out some of the forms to get him to this position. Okay. And digits and stuff? No, I'll actually go into a separate file or a separate shape over here. I'll build a separate hand, and then I'll bring the two together and just merge them. And ZBrush will just blend everything together. That way I can just focus on what the hand looks like, get it in here, size it, and then put it on. If you have like toes and stuff, yeah. The hands are harder because the fingers are typically you want separated, but the toes typically they're together so you can get away with it. That's one of the things with the Damien standard tool is that I don't have enough resolution yet, but let's just pretend I did. As I get in here for the toes, I can basically just like start cutting in where I want those toes to be, and then using like inflate to start inflating the area where the toe would actually come out. So in this case, this guy only has 2 toes. And then I could even use my move tool if I wanted these to, let's say, pull out here, pull out there. Maybe pinch these in a little bit tighter together there. Add a little clay buildup on this side. And I'm using my mouse, obviously, it's not going to be very nice. This guy was actually done with just the mouse, so it's not like you can't do it with it. You just got to be a lot more gentle with how you're adding stuff. So that's not too bad to do like this. Just when you get into the hand area and you have all this detail here, I want to zoom in and I want to be able to shape each one of those. Even building just one finger and duplicating that finger over to the other pieces is a lot easier than trying to build each finger separately and get all the detail inside there. Okay, and you can think about clothing or dress or however you're going to do it. In this case, he'll probably have some sort of shoe or something on, maybe some sort of tarp, just some kind of covering. So I can go pretty generic on the detail underneath the clothing. But if you look at him from the side view, it looks like he's actually standing, or he could be standing. Like if I were to 3D print him and put him on the desk, I think that that would pretty much stand. If he was too far forward, let's go here to my move tool. If his feet were like this, that doesn't feel like he would be able to stand. It looks like he would just fall backwards. And the same thing with the other direction. If I clicked on this and pulled it back like that, he would then fall forward. So any pose you put your character in, try to make it feel like they actually could be standing there. Because you don't want to go through all this work. Let's say you 3D print it and then it just falls over every time, right? That would suck. Cool. Any other questions? All right.